Hey there, geographers, and welcome back to the Mr. Sinn channel. Today we're going to be talking about 10 common mistakes that students make when taking AP Human Geography tests. These are mistakes that are happening both in the classroom and also on the national exam in May. And these are mistakes I noticed in my own classroom, I noticed when reading for the AP National Exam, from talking with other teachers, talking with other students, and just looking at past chief reader reports from all the different national exams. So the goal of this video is to make sure you avoid these mistakes. That way you can do well in your class, you can hopefully do well on that national exam, and get some college credit. Now, some of these mistakes you might be thinking to yourself, why would students make this mistake? This is a really easy thing to avoid. Remember though, when you're taking an AP test, you're taking a college level test, and that can be stressful. And when we're stressed, we don't always think clearly. The number one mistake that students make is they panic when they see a question they don't know.
So, Professor, would you say it's time for everyone to panic? Yes, I would, kid.
Don't panic. Your mind will go blank at one point during this course. You're going to see a question you don't know. Pause, take a deep breath in. Review the question. Maybe look at some of the past ones. See if there's some hints that could help you out. And at the end of the day, if you do get a test back and you did poorly on it, don't panic again. Talk to your teacher. Review the test. Another thing that students do is they forget to follow up after the test. It's really important that you review where you got things wrong. Maybe it's certain types of questions that keep tricking you, or it's certain content. By reviewing throughout the year your tests, you'll be able to become better and better at taking them. And then you'll do better on the AP exam. The second mistake that students make is they skim questions. And they're doing this because the test is timed and it's stressful. And so they'll read part of the question, they think they understand it, and they go right into the answers. This is something you should never do. On the 2020 FRQs, there was a question that I was grading that was on environmental sustainability and monoculture. And I cannot tell you how many student responses I read that talked about monoculture, but it did not talk at all about environmental sustainability. Environmental sustainability was at the end of the question. Students read the first part of the question and they went right down and answered it. They didn't finish reading the whole thing. So they didn't get the points because they didn't answer what the question was asking. So always make sure you read each question in its entirety and also read all the answers in their entirety as well. The third mistake that students make is they don't read the data correctly. A lot of questions are going to connect to a map, to a population pyramid, to some form of stimulus. You're going to have data. And oftentimes when students see that, they go right down to the question. Never do this. When you do that, you're not going to take time to really look at the information. You should look at the stimulus data first. Look at that map, look at that chart, see what it is saying. So many students in past years lose points because they go right to the question, they don't understand what information is being presented, and then they end up answering it wrong because they didn't read the data correctly. So always take some time and look at that map carefully. Review it, make sure you understand exactly what is being shown to you. Then go and answer the question. Now, the fourth mistake is specific to FRQs, and it's one thing that I noticed a lot on the national exam for 2020. It's either students are not using the stimulus provided in an FRQ or they're overusing it. Now, that might seem weird, but what happens in an FRQ is you're going to get maps, you're going to get data, and you're going to have to answer questions based off that information. And one of the things I noticed when grading some of these tests was some students would never talk about the data that was provided in the question, even though it specifically asked them to reference it. And other students would reference the data on every aspect of the question, sometimes actually creating answers that didn't make sense because there was no data that provided that answer, but they thought they had to connect to it. So they ended up creating information that wasn't there. Always read that question again and make sure you answer exactly what it asks. If it's connecting back to the stimulus that was given to you, make sure your answer connects back to that data. If it's not, you might not have to use it. The fifth mistake is another FRQ mistake, and it's not understanding the task verbs. When you're taking an AP test, you're going to have FRQs that are going to ask you to explain, to describe, to compare. All these different things have specific meanings. And I'm actually going to do an entire video on the task verbs to make sure you know exactly what they mean. Because on the past tests, many students lose points because they describe a concept instead of explaining it. Or instead of comparing a concept, they're actually just describing it, or they're identifying it. So it's really important that when you are reading these questions, you know what they're asking. The next mistake that students make is they use too many generalities. Try to avoid replacing nouns with pronouns. Whenever possible, use the person's name or the name of the model. Try to avoid things like "he believes" or "you can see the connection between the two items." This is vague and it doesn't show a full understanding, especially when you're taking the national exam in May. Remember, your teacher's not grading it. They can't ask you a follow-up question. Many students are right there at getting the point, but they don't provide enough detail to really show they know it. And since we can't ask any follow-up questions on a test, then you don't get the points. So always make sure you complete your thought process and you try to use as many details as possible. The next mistake that students make is they restate the question in their answer and they don't provide new information. Remember, we know what the question is. Your job is to add additional information to fully answer it. Simply restating the prompt isn't going to get you points. So always make sure you're not just restating exactly what information was already provided to you. You won't be able to get full points if you do that. Now, just to clarify this last tip, it is okay for you to rewrite a question or to reword it as long as you're adding additional information. Some students find it beneficial to actually do this. This guides their answer to make sure they're answering the full question. What you have to avoid, though, is rewording the question or rewriting the question without adding additional information. So if you are going to reword a question, make sure you've provided additional information to fully answer it. Another mistake that some students make is they don't stick to the facts. They don't stick to what they learned in class, and they end up connecting their answer to stereotypes, generalizations, sexist comments, or racism. Make sure you're focusing on what you learned. You're going to be having to answer questions about all different groups of people, religions, cultures all over the world, and it's important that you stick to what you learned in class. So always avoid using stereotypes to try and justify an answer. The next mistake that a lot of students make is actually not understanding the scale of the question. Questions are going to ask you a variety of things, and many questions are going to actually ask you about scale. And if a question asks you about a local level, then make sure your answer is about the local level. If a question's asking you about global politics, make sure your answer connects to the global scale. It's important to note that when you're reading the questions, you need to answer in the correct scale. So always read those questions thoroughly and make sure you review your answer to make sure you didn't accidentally talk about the wrong scale. The last big mistake that I noticed is one that all students struggle with, and it's writing way too much. When you're taking FRQs in AP Human Geography, you need to just answer what the question's asking. Focus on giving the information that answers each part of the question, then go on to the next one. Don't feel like you need to write a paragraph for every single question you have. You won't have enough time. If you have more to say and you do have time at the end of the test, there's always time then to go back and add to it. But if you try to answer everything you know, you're going to run out of time. So focus on what the question's asking. Answer the question, and then move on to the next step. And there you have it. Those are the most common mistakes that students make on the AP test. And the more you take AP tests and the more you practice with some of these questions, the better you're going to get at it. So I encourage you to continue to practice good testing habits. Avoid these mistakes. And if you don't do well on a test, definitely talk to your teacher. Go through the test so you can identify where you're struggling with. Now, if you do need help with FRQs, with multiple choice, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be coming out with videos that'll go over how to write an FRQ, the task verbs, and videos that'll also cover multiple choice tests. Plus, I'll have videos on all the content for AP Human Geography. Hopefully this video helped you out. I'm Mr. Sinn. Thank you so much for watching it. And until next time, geographers, I'll see you online.